add value to your business, or do you want to just be this administrative person?
And often, if you look at your talent team and the caliber of talent in your company, they correlate.
You could hire the best person for the job if they were in your candidate pool.
All these individual employees, one by one, together, their voices all come together to articulate the culture of the company.
This is
Hiring on all cylinders.
Hello again, recruiting pals. Rob Stevenson once more for Hiring on All Cylinders, and I am absolutely thrilled to be back in the Intello office. A little bit of a return to normalcy here after we hit you with 33 episodes in 48 hours while we were broadcasting live from the floor of HR Tech. It was a wild, wild ride. Got to talk to some people who founded the conference, some of the top analysts. They just blew me away and blew the roof off the place with all their knowledge. It was an exceptional, exceptional trip. I hope you go back and listen to as many of them as you can. They're only 10 minutes a pop, so go for it. It'll be fun, I promise. But we are back in the office. I have Amina sat across from me. Amina, it's so wonderful to be back on the microphones with you.
I miss you, Rob. It's good to have you back.
Thank you. We have just finished one of our ongoing segments. Rob and Amina hire their bosses. Well, half of it anyway. We have found our director of recruitment.
We have.
Do you want to explain what that final process was like?
Yeah. So we hired Britt Ryan. She came from Lithium Technologies. She was at Riverbed and Salesforce before that. She is awesome. She's been here for a week and a half, and I feel like I'm already just connecting with her really well. I feel like our personalities match, and more than anything, in every single conversation we have, I feel like I'm constantly learning.
That's the key.
That is the key thing when hiring our bosses, right?
Yep.
And I already see how much of an impact she's making. We had our first one-on-one today, and just going into it, I didn't know what that would look like, and walking out of it, I feel like we have a really good structure. I know what we're going to be doing, how we're going to be spending our time together, which is great. Britt had many long conversations with Intello. I think that's one of our things is we have a lot of conversations with our candidates, but it's not a bad thing. We like to be thorough, and she finally accepted, and she's here. How's your job manager search going, Rob?
I don't know how much I'm allowed to say, but it's going well.
It is going well.
We did a second debrief on a candidate that I really liked, which was interesting. And while I was incredibly bullish for the first one, I sort of flipped and I was kind of playing devil's advocate a little bit. I was sort of skeptical, but no, I'm still very supportive of the candidate. So it was really interesting having that conversation and being involved in what are our concerns, and that is giving our CMO and our CEO fodder for follow-up. It's this is that was not the scope of my interview, but those are my concerns. Now this is up to you to both sell and then assess for this final piece of it. So I'm taking a leaf out of your book and I'm remaining skeptical. I know when we first brought him in, I was super stoked because he seemed like he was leaning in. And you're like, Rob, there's a long way to go. So we'll see. It's not 100% yet, but soon, hopefully, we can put the entire segment to bed.
I will keep you posted.
I love it. And keep the podcast land posted. I also want Podcast Land to meet our director of recruitment, Britt Ryan. I would love for her to become a regular on the show if she wants to. But when we introduce her, I want her to be the star of the show. So that's why she's not on this episode, because the star of the show is Maia J. She's over at Greenhouse. You hear me talk about Greenhouse a lot on this show because I simply adore the company and all the people in it. She is a VP of strategy and people over there, and she is sitting right next to me. Maia, how are you?
I'm great. And I'm so glad you adore Greenhouse because Greenhouse adores you guys.
Oh, I love it. Greenhouse is easy to adore. We actually just had your CEO, El Queso Grande, Daniel Chait, was on the podcast at HR Tech, came by, and we had a conversation, and it was awesome. It was really, really great chatting with him.
I heard I have big shoes to fill today.
He was very on brand, very, talking points ready.
Sounds good. I think it's the one time he'll warm up for me, so I will take advantage of it.
Exactly. So what have you been working on lately? I'm just kind of curious to catch up with you.
So we're in Q4, which means a lot of 2017 planning.
Right.
From headcount to budgeting to just kind of overall company stuff. So I feel like my brain is sort of in what's going to happen in a year from today.
Right.
Which is confusing and fun.
Exactly. It's like you're going to set some aggressive goals for yourself, and you're going to realize, oh, if we hit all these goals, that means we get another 30, 40% on top of that. But that's what you want, right? You're a fast growing company. So
yeah, I mean, That's always the goal, right? Is keep growing and growing.
Absolutely. You wrote about something that no one to my knowledge is really talking about in recruitment and talent, but it's something that you see a lot in customer success, certainly in sales and marketing, which is the idea of lifetime value. And so that was one of the first acronyms I learned as a marketer, CAC over LTV, customer acquisition cost over lifetime value. And you've essentially been able to apply that to your employees, to talent. So I have a million questions about it. Can you kind of take us back to the beginning? What was the conception where you were like, let's start looking at this. Let's figure out what this is all about, what this means for talent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's kind of helpful to take a bit of a step back and just tell you about my career for a second, because it'll give context as to why I started thinking about it. I've had a very varied career. If you can find the common thread and give me the good narrative, please tell me, because I'm still looking for it.
I'll work on that.
Laundry list. I was a derivatives trader on Wall Street for a while. I was a founder and CEO of a company that I ran for a few years. And then I sold that to Living Social and ran a few of the business units there. So I ran a sales team, a couple of marketing folks, some product, and about 70 full-time, 700 part-time people across the country, and managed a pretty nice sized P&L. So when I came to take the head of people job, I only knew how to think about things from the terms of, numbers, data, P&L, and ROI.
Right.
And when I went to go talk to Daniel, our CEO, to say, here's what I want to build, I didn't know how to have that conversation without talking about the return of what I was going to build was going to bring to the organization. So kind of just talked to my team and tried to think about what is the impact that people can have on the org. And like you said, why reinvent the wheel? Let's see what other parts of the organization do.
Yep.
So from the days running a business unit, I thought about CAC to LTV. So for those who don't know, CAC is customer acquisition cost, LTV is lifetime value. And that's how you think about it from a customer perspective. And the way you know how much you're willing to spend to acquire a customer is how much lifetime value they'll give you, how much they'll provide. So I kind of thought that probably also applies to people, right? It's not just about hiring, like having the lowest recruiting costs ever. I'd rather hire the best people and pay a bit more for them.
Yep.
And that's kind of where the whole genesis came from.
So there's a little bit of a misconception, I think, or maybe it's just my misconception, that it's going to yield you like one number, and then you wave that around and go into the board meeting. Hey, here's our ELTV. That's not the case though, right?
I haven't figured it out. So if someone does, my email is Maia@greenhouse.io. Let me know. Here's how I think about it. There's so many inputs to how you think about the lifetime value of an employee. And just speaking really generically, there's the actual contribution, like the results they bring to the organization. And then there's, how collaborative they are with the rest of the org. Do they help support everyone else? Are they someone who mentors people? Are they someone who's really involved in the culture and makes the culture better? Are they someone who speaks up and gives feedback when stuff isn't working well and presents solutions? So to be able to take all those things and put a number on a person, I haven't been able to figure out how to do.
Right.
But I would say that it, right? As a manager, which one of your team members are performing tremendously. And you always want them to have more bandwidth so you can put more stuff on their plate, because they're just going to deliver excellent results. And you always want them in the team meetings because they're going to contribute a lot and bring a great perspective. So it's really about understanding what makes a great employee and being able to drive that. And I think you can understand how different people practices help you bring those kind of people into the organization. And the difference is so dramatic. This is the point. The difference is so dramatic that it doesn't matter if you don't have the exact number. Like if someone's contribution is a 3.1 versus a 3.7 is way too nuanced. But what you can say is, this person is a tremendous contributor and I would hire 10 more of them. And this person's good, but if we didn't hire more people like them, our org would be fine too.
So after being able to do this, have you been able to turn around any of the good employees into the great employees?
Yeah, it's a great question. Definitely. I think once you understand what it takes to be able to help employees be their best selves and be great in their roles, you can do a lot to help them be even more successful. So one thing we've identified pretty early on is that management and development can do a tremendous amount for ELTV. And would it be helpful to take a step back and visualize the curve for a second?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So you promised me we could edit these if I don't do it well on the first time. So I'm going to try.
You're going to nail it. I'm leaving this in.
In full disclosure, every time I describe this, I have either a whiteboard or a slide deck that I can describe it. So you promised me a link to it. So if I do a terrible job.
Either way, even if you do a really good job, there in the description, there's a link that you can go and visualize this and kind of listen along at home or watch along at home.
Okay. So if you're listening, close your eyes. And I really don't know how this is going to go. But you picture a graph and you think that on your x-axis, the axis that goes across, you've got this concept of time. And on your y-axis, the one that's going vertically, you've got this concept of output. And you think about a person when they first start, they're on the negative end of this spectrum because you've just invested a lot of recruiting resources into them and interviewing time. So they've taken resources from your company and haven't really produced anything. And that's totally fine. And what happens over time is they start to ramp and they start to get higher on this output curve. So if you think as time goes on, where they started at this negative point, they slowly start going up and up and up to some point that they get to, and they finally become what we would call a fully contributing member. At that point, they have positive output and they're doing great stuff. Then you think from that point, you can, and this is to get to that question, some people can plateau, but under the right circumstances, the right people can continue to grow. So they don't just reach this point of fully contributing member and stay there, but they actually continue to grow and produce more over time. And so you think this curve keeps going and there's a way to, help people's ceiling keep getting higher and higher. And so if you're picturing now the curve, you started negative, you're going up, 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 up to the right. Then at some point, I jokingly call the moment when you have lots of doctor's appointments.
Right.
You go and have lots of doctor's appointments over the course of a couple of weeks and decide it's time to leave. And then, your output goes to zero at that point. And if you can visualize this, give me a thumbs up. Can you visualize it? Okay. I guess
I'm looking at it right now, so I'm cheating, but I can visualize it.
I can visualize it. Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
So if you can visualize that, all that area under the curve, calculus question. Do you guys know what that is?
No.
The integral.
I didn't do well in calculus.
Who knew we were going to be doing calculus in HR, right? So if you take the area under the curve, which is also the integral, that's conceptually your employee lifetime value.
Okay.
So to answer your question, how you can maximize this concept of ELTV is take those inputs. So there are situations where people can just plateau and they just don't keep growing. Or there are situations where you take good people and you figure out what they need to keep going higher and higher on their output curve, on their ceiling. And that what that looks like is great management and a culture of development. And development doesn't just come from the manager, but it comes from the person as well. But if you can facilitate both of those things, you can help someone go from a plateauing ELTV to a continuously growing one, which, and to be clear, it's not just like, oh, that's good for the business. I think in those scenarios, it's great for the person as well. Like you want people who are going to continue to grow and people want to be in organizations where they can keep growing. So that's sort of the sweet spot.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, it is pushing out that, you call it decision to leave on the graph, or the multiple doctor's appointments in 2 weeks situation.
Yeah.
It's like pushing that out. And the way you push that out is by people continue to grow, and they are growing in their career, and they're growing also in terms of their output, right? They're more valuable to the company because they are maturing as a professional.
Yeah, absolutely. Like a recent LinkedIn study showed that I think if you aggregate both of these things, it was something like over 50%, it might have even been 70% of people leave a job because they don't have development opportunities, they have a bad manager, or there's a bad culture. So
right.
You kind of take that aggregate and say, if we could tackle all of those, we can increase people's lifetime here, not just from a time perspective, but also from the quality that they're bringing to themselves and to the organization.
In this, the blog post you wrote about it, which I familiarized myself with, you identified a handful of areas where you can optimize for ELTV.
Mm-hmm.
So you have onboarding, talent acquisition, management and development, and culture and management.
Yes.
If I'm a recruiter listening to this, I'm thinking, all right, like, what can I do at my organization to increase my LTV right off the bat? What's like the least complex?
Yeah. Well, if you're a recruiter, I have good news for you. You're in the best spot to maximize ELTV for your organization, because hiring great people is the single most important thing you can do. And it was in Laszlo's book in Work Rules, Google spends more money on recruiting than they do on development, because ultimately bringing in the best people is what's going to give you the most leverage long term, rather than taking the people you have and trying to get them to, go up to the next level. So as a recruiter, the thing I will stress, and it's what our team thinks about all the time, is how do you bring in the best people for the job? And that goes in a couple ways. It's got to be the best job for the person too, right? So you're bringing in, it's a two-way fit. So you've got to bring in someone who wants this job and knows that they're going to be successful and thrive in this job. And you've got to bring in someone who, for the job itself, has the skills and the traits that you need for them to be successful.
How have you seen your recruiting team implement this?
In a couple ways. We are pretty religious about our kickoff meeting, to the frustration sometimes of our hiring managers, but they're
so important.
They are so bought in now. Yeah. And so from the kickoff meeting, the first question we ask our hiring managers is, what does an awesome person do in a year? And that's the lens we like to kind of start the conversation with, because so often when you think about filling a role, you're thinking about, what do I need tomorrow? I need this person to do these 3 things tomorrow. And you can get a really good person to do those 3 things tomorrow. But if you're actually thinking about what kind of contribution you're looking for someone to make on your team long term, it's really helpful to think, what will I be so ecstatic if someone's doing in a year from now? And kind of working backwards from that to define the profile. So then all of a sudden, just on your very first conversation, the profile you're defining is for awesomeness 1 year from today. And I think that's a really helpful lens to even just start the recruiting process, because then you know who you're looking for, you know how to assess them, you know how to think if they're going to be the person you want them to be. So that'd be kind of my thing, is if you're going to do anything, have a great kickoff meeting.
Yeah, those are very impactful. So how did you get your hiring managers to be bought in to spend so much time up front in kickoff meetings?
Yeah, I need to preface this by saying that because we sell a recruiting software, our hiring managers are generally very bought into recruiting in general.
Same here at Intello. Yeah, we're very lucky here. I think we're in unique situations.
Yes. Yeah, and I will say we're in a fortunate situation, and not everyone wanted to go through that whole entire process at first. So I would start by picking the managers who are most bought in. Because odds are, if you look across the board, there are some managers who definitely already believe this stuff, probably already do it, have seen it work well at a previous company. So pick the ones who are going to be your best evangelists and do it a few times with them, because odds are, however you're structuring your kickoff meeting is probably not that good. And I say this because our first version was really bad. So the first time we did it, I used to send people this 10-page Google Doc and expect them to fill it out before our meetings. And shock, no one
did, right?
Yeah. But working with these bought-in hiring managers, we perfected the process together. So that did 2 things. It made the process better, and it helped that hiring manager be even more bought into the process because they had a hand in shaping it. And as we start doing it and start seeing some really great results, a couple things, it'll decrease your hiring time because you're really clear on what you're looking for.
Yep.
You'll generally get better hires, and which you realize that over the longer term, because you're really clear about what you're looking for. So starting with the bought-in hiring managers and using them as case studies for other people, and then getting a few more managers on board. And what we found was, it's kind of like the same thing. The adoption curve, you think you have the early adopters, the early majority, late majority curve. It's kind of the same thing. Find your early adopters for hiring managers, bring in the early majority, and then everyone else will just kind of start to follow because they realize it really works.
They'll realize that, those ones, the other people who are bought in, their roles are getting filled faster and with better people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a prime motivator, right?
Yeah.
Having those people on their team.
I don't need to convince anyone. Let the evidence convince people.
Exactly. Proof's in the pudding.
Yep. Data tells a story.
I'm going to go with proof's in the pudding, but
that one's good.
So can you go back to maybe even the initial assessment and start to determine how accurately your interview process vets for employees who are going to have, a very short onboarding time or are going to have unlimited growth potential, to kind of take that back to the initial process so that right off the bat your ELTV is going to be higher. You're giving yourself the best chance at it.
I think that's a great question. I would start with, again, first you've got to define what you're looking for. So here's a good example of something we've done recently that I'm really excited about, that I don't know why we didn't do 3 years ago, but I'm glad we did it now. We realized that we weren't consistently interviewing managers for their management skills. If they were coming into a role that was going to do a lot of things, we would interview for all the things, but we didn't have the specific interview where we tested everyone in the same way for management skills. And as we've been talking about, management is a huge contributor to ELTV for your whole entire company. It's a very leveraged thing you can do. So we worked with some of the best managers in the company to come up with questions that we thought would assess for great managers. And we put it into action. It hasn't been that long, but the initial stuff we've seen is great. And what I mean by that is some people are passing with flying colors, and some people are getting really tripped up on these questions where we're asking for examples of stuff they've done that demonstrated great management. To us, that is going to be a great, I'm guessing here, but I'm feeling pretty confident about this, that activity of assessing for management skills is going to be a tremendous input we can have into our ELTV of the company. Because if we can bring in great managers, we can help our whole employee base continue to develop.
They'll develop and they'll stay, more importantly, right? Or equally as importantly.
Yeah, and grow.
Absolutely. Is that the most important piece then, when calculating ELTV, is the potential for growth at an individual level?
I think that's a great question. And it's also a really complicated answer. I think the short answer is it depends. Because in some roles, that's absolutely what you're looking for, right? So if you have a group of entry-level salespeople and you know that you want them to crank right away and you want that to be your pool of people that you select to be your account executives, then absolutely hiring hungry people who can learn fast and grow is awesome. But I think there's also scenarios like if you're hiring a new chief marketing officer where growth is certainly important, but more importantly is their experience, the knowledge they bring, and all those things. So you definitely want them to grow, but more importantly, you want them to be able to hit the ground running from day one. So I think it really depends.
Yeah, exactly. In that case, you don't need to give your CEO like the manager kit and be like, are you going to be able to bring our CMO to their like potential? Like at that point, like in their career, they've been around the block a few times. It's not as important for them to like be like, am I gonna grow in this job?
Right. And of course they still will, but I wouldn't put that as the number one thing you're looking for.
Absolutely. So it depends on the role. And then recruiters, right off the bat, you said like obviously hiring great people, first piece of the puzzle. Mm-hmm. Can they identify the bottleneck easily on like what is it stopping our employees from contributing all this value? Like is it onboarding? Like can we shorten the onboarding time and get them to that contributing stage faster? How do they kind of pinpoint what the issue is?
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, what it really boils down to is having a really good feedback loop across the whole entire people team and understanding what data you want to track, which is easier said than done. So, tracking attrition data, I think, is quite lagging, but also really helpful. So understanding why people are leaving, how long they're staying before they're leaving. Because if people are leaving after a few years, it doesn't flag a huge problem for me.
Right.
But if you have a cohort of people who are leaving after 6 months, I'd say something's wrong. So being able to figure out why that's happening and tying that back to recruiting and onboarding is really helpful. Because if someone's leaving after 6 months, it might be because they don't like the culture or the management. But my hunch would be that it's actually probably because the role wasn't right for them to begin with.
Right. In the comments of the blog post, you mentioned that you have a few other models you're working on. Could you give us like a little teaser trailer of analytics to come?
Well, one thing we've been talking about is figuring out how to model out people teams and what the right structure is for different phases of an organization. So it's a little bit less mathematical, but still, yeah, I think I'm excited for that one. And we're looking for more examples of teams and companies. So again, my email is Maia@greenhouse.io. Definitely give me a shout if you want to talk to me about your team structure.
Awesome. I would keep picking your brain on this all night, but you have a ferry to catch and we have lives to live. So I will simply say thank you so much. This is awesome. When your next piece on measuring the people team comes out, you can come back for round 2.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. This is really fun.
Thank you.
Good. I'm glad you liked it. And to all you out there in podcast land, thank you so much for tuning in one more time. Maia J has been Maia J. Amina Moinadeen's been Amina Moinadeen. I've been Rob Stevenson, and you've all been wonderful, beautiful, talented, amazing recruiters. Have a spectacular week, and happy hunting.